Hi, and welcome again. This is Writing and Illustrating Kids' Books, The Inside Story at the Vancouver Public Library, and we're presenting this in partnership with the children's writers and illustrators of BC. My name is Leah. I work with the programming and learning team here at the library, and all 21 branches of the Vancouver Public Library are situated on the traditional and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. At VPL, we know that our work requires sincere action towards truth and reconciliation. And when we acknowledge this land, we hope that it's both an opportunity to reflect on the ongoing history of colonialism in so-called Canada, and also a call to action to move forward in support of Indigenous-led decolonization initiatives. And I know some of you might be joining from outside of Vancouver tonight, so please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and to let us know where you're joining from. And I'll just ask you to make sure that your chat messages are set to go to everyone and not just to hosts and panelists, so that everyone can see each other's comments. If you're having any technical issues, you can also use the chat window. I see someone is asking about audio. Maybe Jana, my colleague Jana, is monitoring the chat right now. She'd be available to help you with any of those issues and to help answer any other questions that might come up today. And we really welcome your comments and your feedback in the chat. We really love an involved and responsive audience, and we just ask that you're mindful of what you type in the chat and to please keep your words respectful. Tonight's session is being recorded and it'll be available for replay on VPL's YouTube channel. And we'll be putting a link in the chat for our VPL program feedback survey. So if there's something that you thought we did really well this evening, or if you have suggestions for what we could do differently next time, please share. The survey takes about 2 minutes, and we'll put the link in the chat now and also once again at the end of the program. So this evening, we have members of the children's writers and illustrators of BC. They're here to share their knowledge with you on how they broke into the exciting and competitive field of children's literature. So whether you're just starting out as a writer, or if you've got some experience under your belt already, if you're just plain curious to get some behind the scenes industry info, you're in the right place. Our panelists will start tonight by taking turns telling you about themselves, introducing themselves, and giving you a little insight into how they got started in their careers. And then we're going to have about an hour for a Q&A session where you can ask all the questions you have about the children's literature industry. So about asking those questions, I'm going to get you to put them in the Q&A box and not in the chat. We want them in the Q&A box so that they're easy for our moderator to see and to answer. So tonight's discussion will be moderated by Ellen Schwartz. If you've attended this program in past years, you'll recognize Ellen. Really happy to have her back again this year. Ellen is the author of 17 books for children, from picture books to early chapter books, teen novels, and nonfiction. Her latest middle grade novel, The Princess Dolls, won the Western Canada Jewish Book Award for Children and Young Adult Literature. And I'd like you to now please join me in a warm welcome for Ellen.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Ellen.
And hi, everybody, and welcome. Yes, if you've been here before, you probably recognize my face. My hair is a little grayer than it used to be, but c'est la vie. So as Leah said, this session is really for you, the audience, to find out what you want to know about writing and illustrating children's books. So we will start by having each of the panelists introduce him or herself and talk about how they got started and how they developed their career. And then the rest of the time is for answering questions, which, as Leah said, you can put into the Q&A box. And I will choose questions and read them out. You can direct your question to a particular person on the panel, or you can leave it open to anybody on the panel to answer. I may not choose your question because sometimes questions are similar, or sometimes we just have to keep it moving. So please don't be offended if I don't choose your particular question, but we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. And I know that at the end, Leah has a page of resources to share with you that the panelists have contributed to, resources to help you in the field. So what we're going to do is we're going in reverse alphabetical order by last name. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pam Withers, who's going to start for us.
Hey everyone, I am Pam Withers, author of 26 sports and outdoor adventure novels, and that are particularly popular with boys. Or to put it another way, I'm that weird woman who writes about extreme sports. Let me tell you a bit about how I got started. So I was a journalist and editor and found myself unemployed for a year when my son was 10 years old. I decided to keep myself out of trouble, I would write a novel. Now, it was inevitable that it was going to be about whitewater kayaking because that is how I misspent my youth. And it was inevitable it was going to have a boy character because I figured if it never got published, it would be a good bedtime story for my then 10-year-old son. Besides, I knew all too well how few girls kayak. So I wrote most of it in an ice skating rink while my son was at practice. It took me 4 months to write it, and then it took 3 years for 9 publishers to reject it before a 10th sensible publisher decided to publish it. Now, I had pitched it as the first in a series on extreme sports, and they called my bluff and said yes. 10 books later, I had written 10 books with a boy main character. And my agent said, stay with that. There's a real shortage of books for boys, and you have the magic 5-letter word, which is niche. So 26 years and 26 books later, here I am. But I want to get back to getting boys to read. Everyone knows it's harder to get boys than girls to read, especially when they hit their teens. It doesn't help that 75% of young adult novels have girls as the main character, or that 86% of authors and editors for children's books are female, and that the vast majority of teachers and librarians are female. So let me give you 3 tips for getting preteen and teen boys to read, and also tips on writing for them. If you could switch to slide number 2, Jonah. So the number 1 is the not-for-profit website yadudebooks.ca, which offers middle grade and young adult book reviews and nearly 40 author interviews. Those interviews are a gold mine of tips for how those authors got started and how they grew their careers. Number 2, a book I co-authored with my educator and therapist sister called Jumpstarting Boys. It includes lots of tips for writing for boys, and it's in the Vancouver Public Library. Number 3, you knew this was coming, is any of my 26 sports and outdoor adventure books. So slide number 3. So the guys who are here at this seminar, when you are published, you will be big hits in the school presentation system because you are needed as role models. You will probably get hired more than the women. You are a 2-for-1. You encourage boys to read and to write. You will make lots of money speaking on the speaking circuit, so go join Toastmasters. Women who are here, please don't forget to write some male lead characters in fiction or nonfiction that interests all genders. It's a privilege to have all of you here at this seminar, the next generation of authors for teens and children. I love that you are a diverse group, and I love that there are some males here. Embrace your work. Nothing is more fun or fulfilling. I did not say profitable, I said fun or fulfilling. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, Pam, you just dealt with that question pretty handily. Okay, now I would like to ask Jane Whittingham to greet you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Yes, my name is Jane Whittingham. I am coming to you from a very stylish hotel because my apartment got flooded, so I do apologize if there's some very loud music in the background. It just creates a nice ambiance. I am a picture book author, a children's librarian, and a mom to a preschooler myself. And it's funny that Pam mentioned a niche. I like to think I've created a bit of a niche for myself as a writer of books for very young children, specifically in the pre-kindergarten age, baby to preschool. Interestingly, that's also kind of what I work with as a children's librarian. I have written 7 picture books. Well, I've written many. I've published 7 picture books with 3 different Canadian publishers, Pajama Press, Nimbus, and Kids Can Press, all Canadian. And I'm currently working on a project with HarperCollins. I got my start in publishing by reading a lot of picture books as a children's librarian and going, I'm missing some books like this that I could use in my programs. I think I'll try writing them. I did. I sent my first manuscript out in the mail. Not a lot of publishers want you to send them out in the mail anymore, but back then, that's how I did it. And it was published. And I thought, boy, this publishing business is easy. Well, it wasn't. The first one got published right away and was very exciting. And then after that, it was rejection after rejection after rejection, which I'm sure my colleagues will be talking about as well. And maybe you'll have some questions about that because unfortunately, it's part of the game. But I kept going and I kept submitting. And eventually now we're up to 7 books and I'm working on book number 8. So I guess my main piece of advice would be to not give up. Publishing is a long game. And even if you write books quickly, getting them published, boy, it takes a lot of patience, a lot of belief in yourself, a good support network, maybe some ice cream, whatever helps get you through those tough times. But also, again, as Pam said, she said a lot of the things I wanted to say. It is so incredibly rewarding because you have the best audience in the whole wide world. When I read one of my books to a group, I get hugs and I get little ones telling me how much they liked the story. You just can't beat it. It's probably not going to make you a millionaire, but boy, are you going to have a lot of fun. So I hope that you get some useful information out of this session, or maybe just a sense that if we can do it, you can do it too. There's nothing really all that special about us. If we can get published, you can too. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to hopefully being able to answer some of your questions.
Thanks, Jane. That was great. Really encouraging. Okay, next we're going to hear from Mark David Smith.
All right. Hello. Yeah, hugs are optional. I don't get a lot of hugs when I do presentations, and I kind of prefer it that way. Keep a little bit of distance. I'm fine with that. I thought it was interesting. Leah said that this was we were talking about how we got started with this exciting career, and I thought that was an interesting choice of words, exciting, because like Jane said, it is a long game. Everything about publishing is glacial, and for me that is painful because I tend to be a little bit impatient and I like things to happen right away, and nothing happens right away. So I'm, and in terms of career, I'm a teacher, and, Jane's a librarian, and, there's very few writers that I know that only write kids' books. Like Pam said earlier, not necessarily profitable. And especially when you think about the gap between when you get an advance and when royalties start coming in for a book and how many books you're even selling. I don't know too many that can live off of that. It's most of the people I know have another job. So I've been teaching for a long time, and just telling you how I got started. I had kids. They're older now, but when they were little and we were reading lots of picture books, I kind of thought I could do that. They like these, I have some ideas. Well, if my first daughter was born in 2002, my first picture book was published in 2021. So, you know, maybe not that easy. And I got started with kind of an unconventional route. I had been writing these picture books, and I went to a pitch night, and one of the editors from a local publishing company was there and suggested that maybe I take a course with the publisher out in UBC's creative writing program there. So I did that course, and I learned a lot about picture books, but you know, didn't really make any sort of headway with the picture book I was trying to write. But the publisher was interested in a novel idea that I'd pitched to him, and that ended up being my first novel, Caravaggio Signed in Blood, for 12 to 14-year-olds, historical fiction. But I kept writing picture books, kept working on them, and I sent a manuscript out to a lot of publishers, and I got one rejection back that was actually a handwritten rejection with 3 paragraphs explaining, like, I guess it had gone far enough in their process that that they were considering it, but they ultimately rejected it, and they told me why. And that was the most encouraging letter I'd ever gotten. And it just made me think, okay, this isn't working as it is, but there's something there. And I just started fresh with that same story, sent it out again, and then within a few months I got my first acceptance, and that became this picture book, The Deepest Dig, and that's by Owl Kids Press. And while I was publishing this, I kind of pitched a different idea that I had to them about some kooky witches who want to turn over a new leaf and start a detective agency. And they liked that idea, and just so happened that they were closing up a mystery series for young readers, grades sort of 1 to 4. And so that's become this series. So my first book in the series just came out last year, The Weird Sisters, A Note, a Goat, and a Casserole. You can see there, and that's illustrated by Kari Roost, and that's also by Owl Kids. And then I just got this one on Friday. This is the new book. This is the second book, The Weird Sisters, A Robin, a Ribbon, and a Lawnmower. And that one comes out in April, and then there'll be another one coming out next year too. So, you know, Pam was saying she's got a niche for these, you know, sports and adventure books. I do not have a niche. I would like to have a niche. If somebody has a niche lying around that they could pass on to me, I would happily accept that. But for the moment, I am nicheless. I have my fingers in different pots, and I'm told that's not a great way to build an audience. So maybe don't take my advice. But you know, I'm trying to find a groove and sort of lock in there. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started, and you know, I've got more ideas and more books to come. But for now, can't quit my day job. I'm still teaching and still up to my neck in marking. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Mark. Congrats on the new book.
Well, thank you.
It's
Yeah,
great, a brand new book. It's so exciting when you get a brand new book. And I
Smells
think
good.
you come up with the best titles, just great titles. Really, really good. Okay, now I'm turning things over to Elizabeth Sheffron.
Thanks, Ellen. I've been a visual artist ever since I can remember. I'm a fabric artist and a community artist. My most well-known work is the Middle East Peace Quilt, which was an international community art project made by over 300 people, answering the question, what's your vision of peace in the Middle East? And almost all the work I do is part of a quest for a better world for all the people who live in it. Before I created pictures in fabric, I did the same thing using little bits of cut paper. In high school, I used to make birthday cards for classmates by cutting out the colored paper from magazines, and I've never given up this way of working. This is the medium in which I illustrated my children's books. I did eventually graduate to better quality paper. I wish I could tell you that my career as a book illustrator was due to some extraordinary skill which I would happily pass on to you, but I can't. So much of it seems to rest on having been in the right place at the right time, or writing out the times when I wasn't. Somewhere around 1995, I had a show at the Sidney and Gertrude Zack Gallery in Vancouver, And at the opening, I was approached by Carol Frank and Michael Cates, who had a new publishing company at that time, Tradewind Books. They were interested in my work and invited me to lunch. We had a lovely lunch, and just 10 years later, they offered me my first book contract. Could I have the first slide, please? I was thrilled to be illustrating Abby's Birds, written by our own Ellen Schwartz. It was nominated for a number of awards, including a BC Book Prize, but it didn't win. In 2007, my husband Bob Bosson and I self-published an illustrated short story he'd written called Latkes. In 2010, I did another book for Tradewind called Once Upon a Bath Time, written by Vi Hughes. And again, I had a wonderful time doing it. And in 2012, I illustrated Jewish Fairy Tale Feasts, a literary cookbook written by the well-known children's author Jane Yolen and her daughter Heidi E.Y. Stempel. Okay, slide off, please. No slide. Thank you. You'd think my career as a children's illustrator was well on its way, but it wasn't. Even though over the years I've submitted my illustrations to almost all the children's publishers in Canada, nobody else has picked them up. So I figured I could sit around feeling sorry for myself, or I could watch out for a different project. In 2012, my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He's okay now, but to make a long story short, before long our day was peppered with cancer jokes. And every time we made one of those jokes, one of us would say, "That goes in the comic." You understand at this point there was no comic. But being the visual artist in the family, it fell upon me to create one. My first idea was not a book at all, but a series of 4-panel comics embroidered onto fabric and made into quilts. After I had completed a few of those embroideries, some call reached me through the Graphic Medicine site, which is a community of people who draw comics about medicine. And I always respond to calls that seem vaguely relevant to what I do. So I sent off a submission to whoever they were. And a couple of months later, to my great surprise, I received an email from Jessica Kingsley Publishers in Britain saying they were interested in my book. So in 2016, Embroidered Cancer comic came out, and among other things, was reviewed in The Lancet and praised by Judi Dench. Then in early 2020, COVID hit and the world shut down. And I thought, if there's ever a time to stay connected, to be building community, this is it. So I started drawing a daily comic about our life on a Gulf island, and our art, our music, our garden, our politics, and of course our dog. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here it says, "Hi everybody, I'm so glad you're reading my book. I'm Elizabeth, this is Bob, and that's Kona, sometimes known as the dog. I've been drawing comics about our life together, our art, our garden, and on the time of COVID." And the dog says, "Actually, I drew most of the comics." And I say, "You did not, you're just a dog." And the dog says, "You'll have to forgive us for having a domestic dispute so early in the book." Anyway, and initially I was just going to do this for a month, but 3 years later, I'm still drawing comics. And I've selected some of my daily comics and put them together into a book describing the ups and downs of the COVID years. And I'm currently researching self-publishing possibilities for it. It's called Couches Get Lonely Too. Okay, slide off, please. If I was giving advice to people who wanted to get their writing and illustrations out into the world, it would be to work from your heart and then not only think outside the box, but try out as many shapes and sizes of boxes as you can and go inside out them or all around them and have fun while you're doing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I love the way you have the dog turn its head and face us and address us with that little comment. That's really great. Breaking the fourth wall, is that what that's called? Yeah, okay. And now I would like to ask Darlene Foster to give us some comments.
Hi there. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you very much for including me in this wonderful panel of incredibly talented writers and illustrators. I'm the author of a series of middle grade books about a young girl who likes to travel all over the world. She always has an adventure and a mystery to solve. I I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself and how I got into this as well. So I grew up on a ranch in Alberta, and I had lots of time to wander the prairies and dream about traveling the world and writing books. You can see me there as a little reluctant cowgirl there. I'm about, I don't know, I'm about 12, I guess there. I always loved to tell stories, and my wonderful grade 3 teacher encouraged me to see the world and write my stories down. I'm so glad she did. There I am with my lovely grade 3 teacher, Miss Shirley Roll, who's no longer with us, sadly, but she's responsible for these books, or at least partly responsible. Can we have the next slide, please? I enjoy traveling. I've traveled a lot over the years. I've been to many amazing places, and these places have inspired my stories about a young Canadian girl who loves to travel. I've written 9 books in the series. They're called the Amanda Travel series. I also have a house in Spain, where I am right now, and 2 entertaining rescue dogs that keep me busy and get me out and away from the computer once in a while. How the Amanda Travel series started is I went to visit a friend who was working in the United Arab Emirates. I had a fabulous 2 weeks there. I found it so amazing. It was so different, exotic, something that this prairie girl had never seen before. And when I came back, I thought I needed to write a book about it. I've always sort of dabbled in writing. I've had some short stories published, but I've never written a novel. And I started writing a novel, and it was boring. It just wasn't working for me. And one sleepless night, I got up and started writing the story from the point of view of a 12-year-old. And one of the reasons I did that was while I was visiting my friend, she said, Darlene, you're acting like a 12-year-old. And she said it in the nicest possible way, of course, but it was because I was so excited. And the story then, you know, was as exciting as I felt while I was there. And that is how my first book, Amanda in Arabia, the Perfume Flask, came to be. Now, it took me 3 years to write the book because I was learning. I was working full time and learning as I was going. I sent out many, many letters to many publishers in Canada, the United States, England. I still have all the rejection letters, but the rejection letters got nicer as time went along because, of course, I kept improving the book. So it took me 3 years to write the book and 5 years to find a publisher. And I found a publisher in Ladner, BC, believe it or not, after all of that. And she's lovely. She's wonderful. Central Avenue Publishing, a great little independent publishing house. But when she got my book, she said, I'd love to publish your book, but I think this should be a series. So can you write some more? And I said, well, funny you should ask, because in these 5 years of looking for a publisher, I've written another book, Amanda in Spain, The Girl in the Painting, and I have ideas for a couple more. And so that's how the series, I now have 9 books. The most recent one that was just released in the fall of 2022 is Amanda in France, Fire in the Cathedral. My dreams have come true of being a published author and of traveling. And I enjoy seeing my books in schools, libraries, and bookstores. And like Jane, I love reading my books to children and getting all the positive feedback. Can we have the last slide, please? I believe that dreams do come true, but you have to work hard. and like many have already said, you never, please never give up. There's my 9 book covers. If I can do it, you can do it. I didn't get my first book published until I was a grandmother, so there's lots of time. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Sorry. Thanks, Darlene. And I want to point out that not only is Darlene talking to us from Spain, but it's 3:30 in the morning there. So this is above and beyond the call of duty. Okay, so now, Leah, the panelists should come back, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll get
okay.
everybody to turn on their cameras and microphones,
Okay.
and we'll go right into that Q&A.
Okay. I've opened the question and answer box, and it's kind of in the middle of my screen, but it's not covering up my screen for you, is it?
No.
No, okay, good. Okay, so here's the first one. Why are creators who are writer illustrators more desired than authors or illustrators individually? Well, I think we first have to ask, is that true? Are creators who are writer illustrators more desired than individual authors and illustrators? Does anybody have a response?
Well, it's certainly not true for young adults.
When
They don't even have.
When I started illustrating books, I wasn't allowed to meet with the writer. The publishers didn't let me meet with the writer. And we were kept quite separate and worked quite separately through the editor and the art director.
Anybody else want to comment? Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that one thing to know is that when you publish an illustrated book, you split the royalties of that book between the writer and the illustrator. So there's an advantage to being an author illustrator because all the royalties come to you. But from the publisher's point of view, it's actually, especially if you're new, I think it's a disadvantage because nobody knows you, nobody knows who you are. You know, like if I were a new illustrator and the great Ellen Schwartz was putting out a book, you know, and my name could be attached to it, you know, her notoriety would sell the book and people would get to know my art. This will never happen, by the way. I'm a terrible artist. Like I don't draw anything that, you know, but that's kind of like, I think the publishers can use the combination of the well-known illustrator and the lesser known writer or vice versa to help start a career. So yeah, I would say don't let that discourage you.
No. Jane?
I would say too, successful author illustrators are rare, which may be a reason why they're more desirable by publishers, not so much that they're more desirable than any author or illustrator, but because they are rare. Because illustrating for picture books, it's not just about being a good artist, it's about being a storyteller. Because picture books, the pictures are more important often, even than the text, or they fill in gaps in the very sparse text. So I've seen, you know, incredible artists who've needed a lot of coaching to become successful picture book illustrators because it is an art form in itself. And if somebody has the talent to be both a visual storyteller and I guess a textual storyteller, that's an incredible accomplishment, and it's a rare talent. So if a picture book agent or editor finds someone who can do both of those things, that's very exciting because most of us, we have our one great skill or our great side. And so to be able to do both those things, it's hard. It's really hard. And that's why you don't see that many really successful author illustrators, though kudos to you, whoever's out there, if that's what you want to go into.
Right. And one last thing on that, I don't illustrate, so I have no experience there, but I've heard over and over again, even if you do both, lead with your stronger field. If you are primarily a writer, send your text, then let the publisher know that you can illustrate. Then if the publisher wants, you send a few sample illustrations, or you start with illustration and then let them know that you have text. Okay, the next question is self-publication worthwhile? I don't know if any of our authors, I mean, Elizabeth said, you said you were looking into it. Does anybody have a comment or experience? Pam, go ahead.
So I have traditionally published 24 of my books and self-published 2, and I would never, ever recommend self-publishing. That's just my opinion.
Why?
The distribution, the book reviews, the all the things that count are just not there behind you. There's a lot of prejudice against self-published books, and you're not going to get reviewed or distributed or sold to the same extent. If you are a famous rock star and you decide to write a book on the side, go ahead and self-publish it, because you'll do fine.
Yeah. Okay, Elizabeth, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with this. We self-published latkes, and in that case, we printed it ourselves, we distributed it ourselves, we got it out to libraries, we did all that sort of thing. It was an enormous amount of work, but it was worthwhile. Currently, I think it depends what your subject matter is, and I mean, comics are often self-published, which is what I've been doing lately, and so there's different degrees, but it is a lot of work because you do have to do the distribution yourself, but you stay in control and it's kind of fun. So, and there are different ways to do it that can be less expensive or more expensive if you work through a self-publishing company.
Okay. Mark, you had your hand up, but I'm going to skip you because we have 21 questions. Next one. Do you send one story idea to multiple publishers simultaneously, or can you send multiple story ideas to different publishers at the same time? Okay, who wants to jump into that? Jane, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, no. I write lots of stories, and I've had lots of stories written, and I send them out everywhere. Now it's different. I'll lower my hand. I am an unagented author, so I do not have an agent that represents me professionally. I handle all my own book deals, and I send all my books out myself, my manuscripts out myself. So if you do have an agent, the process is different because you'd be working with them. They would be handling your querying and your submissions. I do it all myself, and absolutely, a big thing is to read the submission guidelines of the publishing house that you're interested in. Some of them will say that they want you to only send one submission at a time. So even if you've written 6 books, they don't want you to send all 6 at once. They just want you to send them one. Others don't care. Some want you to, if you're going to send them a submission, you have to only send it to them. And then once they've looked at it and they've told you yes or no, then you can send it to other places. Other publishers don't care. So it really, really is important when you are submitting yourself, if you don't have an agent to represent you, that you read the submission guidelines for every publisher. I usually have several things out at once because, like Mark said earlier too, publishing is so slow. Some of the publishing houses say they hope to get back to you within 6 months. I published with a large Canadian publishing house, pretty big one. My manuscript went into the slush pile because I submitted it myself, didn't go through an agent. The editor didn't get to it for a year. Their website said they hope to get back to you within 6 months. I had assumed that it wasn't ever going to happen. A year later, they got back to me. They understand that you're not just going to sit, twiddling your thumbs for 6 months to a year. You're going to have other projects out on the go. I do recommend that you have some, if you're going to be like me and scatter stories out to the wind while also reading the submission guidelines, that you have some sort of system of keeping track. I just use a Google spreadsheet, but whatever works for you, keeping track of what you sent to where and when and who got back to you so that you can keep track of where you've been sending all your things out. And then finally, before I pass it over to anyone else, if you do get a manuscript accepted somewhere and you've submitted it to other places because you kept track of it in your spreadsheet, it's common courtesy to contact the other publishers and let them know that the book has been accepted. by another publisher. Maybe they'll, you know, if you haven't signed anything yet, maybe they'll offer you something too. I don't know, hasn't happened to me, but it is just a common courtesy to let them know that the book has been taken by someone else so they can move on to the next book in their pile.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. This is probably for Elizabeth. Do you need extensive art experience to illustrate for picture books? Or was it more expedient to get that outsourced while you worked on your story in the book? I think the second question means, you know, having, if you're the writer, finding an illustrator to do the art. But let's start with the first question. Do you need extensive art experience to illustrate for picture books?
Oh boy. Well, you need to figure out what you're doing. You have to have some quality to your illustrations as you do to your writing, of course. And that does to some extent come with experience. Some people do it more quickly. I think it's just all over the map. You have to be good, or you won't be invited to illustrate books. You get invited to illustrate books, and unless you have that quality, I guess that won't happen.
Okay, now for the second part, the second question, does somebody want to address the whole issue of author and illustrator and choosing an illustrator and all that? Panel, anybody? Mark, go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, just briefly, because we've kind of touched on it already, if you're sending to a traditional publisher, you do not get your own illustrator. They choose the illustrator. They have an art director who's going to work with that illustrator to set up the different illustrations. And what they want from you is just the text. So yeah, I would say, I mean, unless you're self-publishing and you're doing that yourselves, well, that's up to you. But if you're sending to a traditional publisher, the answer would be, I think, pretty unequivocally no.
Yeah, good. Okay. I'm skipping a couple. How has the picture book market changed in the last 20 years? Now, this is a big question. So let's keep the discussion short, but does anybody want to jump in on that?
It added me.
And to its great credit, yes. I don't know the answer to that question. Either Jane or Elizabeth, do you have a sense? Yeah. Jane?
I mean, I can't speak as an author, and I can't speak to the publishing side necessarily. I haven't. My first book was published in 2017, but some trends I've noticed as a children's librarian, one of them has been in picture books, has been in length. If you look at picture books from 10, 20 years ago, they tended to be a lot longer. The texts were longer. Now, a publisher is going to ask you for a text no longer than 1,000 words, closer to 500, some of them. So we've gone for a lot shorter texts. Also, the illustration styles have changed. I know when I was growing up here in Canada anyway, a more realistic art style was very popular. You'll see in older picture books a much more photorealistic or realistic art style. You still have books like that now, but there's been a trend towards more cartoony sort of art style becoming really popular. Obviously, fortunately, we have an increase in diversity of creators and topics that would not have been touched on 10, 20 years ago in mass-produced picture books. We also have an increase in books in translation from other countries, which is very exciting. So just sort of some, and again, these are trends. You still have books now that are in a more realistic style and still have picture books with longer texts, but just some trends that we've seen in the industry.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is graphic novels. the rise of graphic novels at both the picture book level and chapter book level. Would you want to add something to that, Mark?
Yeah, just very quickly, it was a good question, about the 20 years, but just be careful as you're thinking about your own picture book that you're not trying to match what people were doing 20 years ago. A lot of publishers will say, hey, look at what's been coming out maybe in the last 3 years, because the book that comes out today was accepted at least 2 years ago. So, there are books coming now. We don't know what the next trend's going to be. You have to kind of guess at that, but definitely be looking at the most recent books you can. Don't go copying Dr. Seuss.
Even though he's great. Okay,
he's great, but he's only one.
All right, here's another big question. Why do some books get rejected? Let's keep it short, but throw your ideas out there. Who wants to jump in?
Some of my rejections have been, we just published something that was similar. We have something coming up that is similar. It's too long, it's too short. It's not the right vibe, it's not the right tone. It's just not quite right sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean,
not helpful.
It's just, yeah. And don't think that because your manuscript isn't getting accepted as quickly as you think it should, that it isn't good, because a lot of the decisions that go into publishing is a business. It's important to remember that. You may come to it as an artist, and obviously people who work in the industry also appreciate books, but it is a business, and publishers need to think about what is going to sell. And so maybe you've written the most beautiful book in the world, but the editor's looking at what they've got planned for the next couple of years, and it's just not going to fit in, and they don't know how well they can market it or how well they can sell it. And so they're going to pass on it. So it isn't necessarily the quality of your manuscript, might be, but there's a lot of factors that go into why a book gets published that are outside of your control as well.
Yeah. Darlene, go ahead.
Yes, and adding to that, I agree with all of that, but also make sure that the book is well edited before you send it out. And when you speak to publishers and people that work in that industry, that's one of the biggest bugbears they have, is getting manuscripts, a great idea, but it's not been well edited, and that right away puts them off. And it's actually worth it to hire someone to go through it, because you're going to miss things if you're going to self-edit. You really are.
I just want to disagree slightly with that. If you are self-publishing, yes, make sure it's edited well. If you're not self-publishing, why would you pay for an editor, which may cost $1,000 that you'll never get back, when you will be assigned an editor who has a whole different vision of what needs to be edited? So maybe yes, maybe not, but I think that perspective needs to be thought of.
Could be self. And I think it could be self-edited.
If I could just add one more thing, one thing that publishers are looking for is diversity. And I mean, really looking for diversity now. So if you are wanting to know why you rejected, that may be one reason. Another is, for instance, if you decide that you're going to have a character who is not the same ethnicity as you, that can be called cultural appropriation, and you will be rejected for that.
Be careful.
Okay.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
It's just that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
You really,
It's got to be
they
in
will
good
throw
shape.
it away if it's riddled with mistakes and errors. Yeah.
Right. Okay, here's an interesting question. How can you identify vanity publishers early in the process? I'm assuming the answer is if they ask for money up front.
Yes.
Any other comments, authors? That's the tip off. Because in traditional publishing, you don't pay to submit, you don't pay to be edited, you don't pay, except for self-publishing, you don't pay to be edited, you don't pay to produce the book. The publisher undertakes those costs. So if a publisher asks for money, then that's what's going on. Okay, go ahead.
Can I just
Yeah.
add that there are such things as hybrid publishers where one half of the company's doing one thing and the other half's doing another, and they are very sneaky. It's really hard to identify them because they're doing both, and I think they do both on purpose so that people will think that they're not self-publishers.
Yeesh, that's scary. I guess another answer to that is, and this relates to something that we were talking about earlier when Jane was talking about reading the submission guidelines. There's a reference book called The Writer's Market. There's also a Canadian edition of The Writer's Market, and that's where you can go to the publishers' websites, which you should do. But you can also look in there for the guidelines, and bona fide publishers will be included in those reference books. Okay, here's a good one. What do you do when you get writer's block? Besides tear your hair out. Who wants to jump on that? Darlene, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I take my dogs for a walk. That's always a good way. I close the computer, leave it for a while, work on another project. Because most of us, I know Jane's mentioned it, have more than one project on the go. So maybe jump into maybe a short story that you're working on that you want to submit to an anthology or a competition, or maybe you've got some other ideas for other books. One of the things I do, because of the nature of my books, is I go through my my photographs that I took on maybe a vacation I had at a certain location, or my journals, because I do journaling while I'm traveling and I get a lot of my ideas for my books from there. But I think that would help with other types of novels and children's books and picture books as well, as look at pictures. YouTube videos helps me a lot, actually, if I get stuck. Start looking at YouTube videos and spurring ideas. Just going for a walk and eavesdropping, listening to people talk gives you ideas too. So there's lots of ways, but I think one of the best things, for me anyways, is to put the book away for a day or so, go and do something different, and then come back to it with fresh eyes.
Yeah,
That works for me.
Mark?
I was just going to share something that I heard at the Writers Fest one year. There was a guy asked a similar question who was a writer, and he said he didn't have writer's block. He was a journalist, he was a professional writer, and if he didn't write, he didn't eat, and his family didn't eat. So he didn't have the luxury of writer's block. And that made a really strong impression on me, that if you just don't make excuses for yourself and you say, I'm going to write this many words. I think a lot of people, my own students, for example, they labor over every sentence and they don't get much written. And so the biggest thing is to allow yourself to write garbage, but get it done, just work through it and then go back to it later and you can edit it.
Great. Okay, here there are two questions that are related. How do you go about developing a marketing plan for a book? Are there any templates you suggest for first-time authors? And do you need to have a fully developed marketing plan to submit to publishers? So, Pam, you're shaking your head. You want to address that?
Marketing plans are what publishers do. So if you're traditionally publishing, you don't need to have anything to do with the marketing plan. They'll do that. They'll work with you. It would be good if you have some kind of experience like Toastmasters, where you can do presentations and speakers. There is a book called Jumpstarting Your Book, I think it is. I'll bring it over from my bookshelf in a second. It's really good on developing a marketing plan if you're self-publishing, or if you want to develop some marketing ideas, even though you don't need to if you're traditionally published.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, my experience is a little bit different. I've been submitting to a number of publishers and looking up reading their submission guidelines, and they are asking, at least half the time they're asking for marketing plans to come in with your submission. So that may be a new thing, I don't know, but that's certainly what I see. And my answer to the question is you build up a network of people. I mean, over the years, you build up a network of people for your email lists and your social media lists, and you just have as many contacts as you possibly can. That's one way to start, and then it becomes a place where you can let people know about your work and ask for help, and build your networks is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I was actually asked to do a marketing plan for my most recent book, but it wasn't pre-acceptance. It was after, I'm pretty sure it was after acceptance. They usually send you a questionnaire and ask for suggestions about publications, organizations, contacts you have that would it be helpful for the publisher to know about. Okay, go ahead, Pam.
Just quickly, my agent told me that prospective publishers actually look to see if you are on social media and if you are a public speaker. And if you are all of those, it will help you get published.
Okay, good. All right, here's a good one. So many story ideas have been done. When I come up with an idea, I always Google it to see if there's already a picture book about that. Is this something that you do? Anybody?
That's just silly, because if you assigned 20 students to do the same book idea, they would come out with 20 very different books. So who cares if it's been done before if you're going to do it differently?
Yeah, because there's no copyright on ideas. So go for it is the answer to the question. How do you keep a picture book manuscript sparse and trust that the illustrators and editor, that question just disappeared. Here it is. How do you keep a picture book manuscript sparse and trust that the illustrators and editors will fill in the intentional gaps? Do you explain the story in thorough detail in the submission letter? So Elizabeth and Jane are our two picture book author illustrators. Any comments?
And Mark. Mark's got a picture book.
Sorry.
One of the things you can do is put illustration notes in your manuscript if there's things that you want to be shown in the illustration that are critical to the story. I think editors often hope that you won't put too many of those, because the idea is that the illustrator is going to put their own spin on it. But that's one thing that I've been told, is if there are specific things that you're not putting in the text that you want to be shown in the illustrations, you can add illustration notes for the editor.
Either Mark or Mark, go ahead. Yeah.
I got an agent this year who's sending out a picture book manuscript that we worked on together, and we put some illustration notes in there because it's about an artist and we wanted to work in some visuals, and we actually got a rejection back saying they didn't like those illustration notes. So again, like, it's totally subjective to the publisher, like the agent thought this was a good idea. This particular publisher said, if we can't see it without the notes, then the text isn't doing its job. That was how they felt. So it's kind of a toss-up. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I think the general rule of thumb is that you put illustration notes in only if there's something that you've deliberately left out of the text because you want the reader to figure it out, but it is necessary to be shown in an illustration. Otherwise, let the story stand on its own. Okay. Are there any writer mentorship programs in Vancouver? I'll leave the Yeah, I'll just leave it at that part of the question. Anybody? Mark?
I'm not sure that you'd call it a mentorship program, but I know that there's a writing program. It's a one-year writing program up at SFU that I know a lot of people have taken. And a lot of the community colleges too will sometimes have writers or people on faculty that will run a course that helps you to develop your writing and your manuscript. I don't know if that's quite what they're asking about, but those are kind of good places to certainly connect with other people who are interested in writing, with a leader who's got some experience in that area. Look at
that. Jane?
There's also through organizations like Squibbie. I know in Vancouver there is a picture book writers group, like a critique group that gets together. I've been to that a couple of times, and it's a good opportunity to share your manuscripts and get feedback from other writers. Organizations like Squibbie, Canscape.
Let me just jump in.
Yeah.
Squibbie is Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So
yes, I couldn't remember what it stood for.
Yeah,
but yes,
and there are other,
sort of those mentoring organizations are great. And some of them, Squibbie does not require you to be published. It doesn't actually require you to be a writer. You could be a librarian or just someone who loves books. So that's one that you could to look into.
Any other suggestions? I would suggest also checking with your local library for writers groups, and your local community center or arts center. Like I live in Burnaby, and I know that there are writing courses held at the Shadbolt Center for the Arts near me. So they're available. Okay, can you put those group names? Okay, I think Leah has got that together.
Yeah, I got those.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Leah. Okay, next. Oh, good one. How much social media presence is required or recommended for published authors and illustrators these days? Pam?
I'm just going to repeat what I said before, which is that they look for that presence and that expertise and that enthusiasm and that comfort level before they even will decide to take your book. So absolutely, it's expected. And I think more and more so as we go on.
Anybody else on that?
Ellen, I just wanted to say I loved your latest TikTok dance. It was incredible, incredible.
Yeah, I'm big on TikTok. Not even quite sure what it is. Okay. But yeah, Pam is right. You do need to be out there with social media. Okay, good one. Good question here. Concerns about copyright when submitting manuscripts. Anybody? Mark.
Yeah, best quote I ever heard from that was Mike Cates. Somebody asked in one of his classes, and he said, "You don't have to worry about copyright. No publisher wants to steal your manuscript. They don't even want it. So don't worry about them stealing it." The fact is, nobody wants to steal it. And if you've written it, you hold the copyright to it just by virtue of the fact that you wrote it. Like you've got it on your computer. If it push came to shove, you can show somebody the date that the file was created, and it's indisputable, but you really don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, now there are two related questions. And I don't know if this is true, but the question is, why do most authors write middle grade fiction books? I don't know if most do, but a lot do. And related to that, what is the minimum and maximum length for a middle grade fiction novel? So, Darlene, do you want to address that? This is your your wheelhouse?
Yeah, from what I understand, and Pam might have better numbers than me, but I think it's around 100,000 words is a middle grade a middle grade book. Is mine are quite short actually, but others are longer. But I think that's sort of a benchmark. What would you say, Pam, is the industry standard?
See, I don't think people should be asking for an industry standard because each publishing company is going to have its own with its own low and high. For instance, most of my reluctant reader books, as they're called, are 40,000 words. Whereas, once I left that category, they were more 50,000 and up. But you need to look at the guidelines of the publisher that you're aiming at, or you need to look at some of the books that they have, because they have different categories. Like, let's just look at Orca books. They have several different types of categories, like Orca currents and Orca soundings, and each one of those has different guidelines and different lengths. So if you're aiming at a particular publisher or a couple of different publishers, look at what their lengths are. Don't just ask for an industry standard.
Okay, anybody else on that? Okay, this is a very interesting question, and I'm going to address this. I'm surprised to see no diversity of identities in this group of panelists in terms of race, gender, etc. Does this speak to the publishing world still honoring white authors, or is there more opening for diverse authors in the Canadian publishing scene? Okay, I think there are a few answers to this question. One is the industry is dominated probably by white editors, publishers, distributors, and so on, because that's how it's traditionally been. And also I'm generalizing here, but it's probably true that white people are in a privileged position of being able to pursue an interest in writing and illustrating, because they're not generally, of course, it's a huge generalization, not generally working at a subsistence level. On the other hand, the organization that we represent, Quill BC, Children's Writers and Illustrators of BC, is kind of necessarily skewed in that direction because it's a professional organization for published authors and illustrators. And every year, since I'm the moderator of this panel, I put a call out to the entire membership, which includes a fair amount of diversity, ethnic diversity at least, to get volunteers for the panel. And this year, this is who volunteered. So that's kind of how it ended up this year. And I hope I haven't terribly overgeneralized, but that's my take. Does anybody want, and I don't want to get into a huge discussion about this, but Jane, go ahead.
Well, I'd be interested, Mark, for your thoughts, but I think also speaking of gender diversity, that the publishing industry is, at least in children's literature, I couldn't speak for adult, is predominantly female. In authors, in editors, in publishers, at least from my experience and from what I know.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and I'm an English teacher, so among English teachers, I'm kind of a minority usually too. I usually find that I work with a lot of women in my day job teaching, and certainly in publishing. Literally every person that I work with is female, and I know that Owl Kids Books, the staff is diverse culturally as well, ethnically, and I know they prioritize that in their books. So when it comes to the writing, they're really thinking about crafting the characters. My first book with them, they changed some of the characters to reflect a more diverse population, and I know that A lot of publishers are making calls out specifically looking for authors of diverse backgrounds, maybe even giving them sort of preferential access so that they can get more diverse authors in their ranks. So
yeah, it's certainly changing. It's certainly changing in publishing, which is a good thing. Okay, here are two more related questions. Once, this is all about rejections. We really opened up this box about rejections. Once you get your rejection letter, can you change your manuscript and submit it to a publishing company again? What happens to your rejected book? Okay, so what happens when you get a rejection? Who's gonna jump in on that? Pam?
When you've been rejected by publisher A, you are done with publisher A. You cannot change it and submit it back, not through an agent, not on your own. You can go on to publisher B, publisher C. And I always recommend that people research the publishers that take the kind of book that they've got, create a list, B list, and a C list, and submit to maybe everybody on their A list if it's not more than sort of 6 at once. But do not tell them that you are simultaneously submitting, because their rule, usually they don't like you simultaneously submitting. I also say that once they haven't responded to you within 6 weeks, you can consider that a rejection. They might surprise you later, but go in on your number 2, your number 3 on the list. That's my opinion. That's what agents do. So why shouldn't we do it? If you strictly follow the rules, you'll have your manuscript to 3 publishers over a 3-year period, and nobody wants to do that.
Okay, anybody else want to talk about rejection? Jane?
Yeah, I would just say the one sort of exception that's definitely true. One of the exceptions is if you get like a re, which is when an editor says, we liked your story, but, and you will sometimes get the opportunity to revise and resubmit. That is something that specifically the editor will ask you for. And in that instance, you can make revisions to your manuscript and resubmit it, and they'll assess it again, and they may want to move forward or may not. But that's sort of the one exception to that, sort of once they've said no, you move on, lick your wounds and move on.
Yeah. Now, I want to say that I have a book coming out next year that was initially rejected, but the editor sent me some real good comments. She didn't invite me to resubmit it, but I thought about those comments and asked her, I got back and asked her, I really appreciate your comments. If I rewrite the book, would you take another look? And she said yes, and they accepted the revision. So, but it, you know, it's a very particular situation. It's not the usual thing. Okay. What are the pros and cons of having an agent? Would you recommend to have an agent? Pam?
So it's just as hard to get an agent as it is a publisher. There's no rule against going after both at the same time. Once you get one, it's easier to get the other. If you have an agent, they not only get theoretically 15% more than you would on your own, because that's the 15% that they're paying themselves with, or 20 or whatever it is, but they know how to handle contracts. They're going to break into larger publishers than you will on your own. There are basically 3 kinds of publishers: large ones who will only consider agented manuscripts, medium-sized publishers who may or may not only consider agented manuscripts, and small publishers who don't care if you're agented, and in fact, agented might cost them more. So just keeping that in mind, don't waste your time with big publishers if you are not yet agented, unless you're really special or want to take lots of time to get your manuscript published.
Okay, anybody else on that? Okay, I don't have an agent, and you know, it doesn't hurt me. I'd like one, but I don't have. Okay, people who with experience in self-publishing, what are the upfront costs of self-publishing? Elizabeth?
Yeah, it depends what company, how you do it. So there are some companies that require you to put up $1,500, $2,000 up front before and then they'll work with you. There are other companies that don't charge anything up front and they just take a percentage off your book. Or if you do it yourself without a company, there's the printing costs that you have to handle yourself and any of the other expenses, but you get back everything that the books sell for. So it's all over the map.
Okay. Anybody else with experience in that? Okay. All right, we're running out of time here. What to look for in a book contract? Do publishers sign contracts one book at a time, or do they sign a contract with you and you'll need to write a certain number of books in a given time period? So, Darlene, you talked about that, right?
Yeah, but I sign a different contract for every book. So, I mean, she asked me if I had more, and I said I did, but for every book that I've written with this particular publisher, and I've only ever been with the same publisher, so I can only speak to that. We just do a new contract every time. So I think every situation is individual in this particular instance. Yeah.
Right. Pam?
Just briefly, so I did a series of 10 books, but every single one was a separate contract. It was basically, you know, you're only good as your last gig. They weren't going to give me a contract for 10 books. And there was something else I was going to say. Anyway, I guess that's the important.
Anybody? Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, with these books, they gave me a contract for 2 books to start it off because they did want it to be a series. I had pitched them 3, and they didn't want to do 3 because they have to commit that money years in advance, and so their budgets don't necessarily, especially if it's a smaller publisher, they don't allow them to do that. But what they do is they make what's called a series contract, so that, you know, I have a 3rd book coming next year. They just add that as basically like an addendum to the existing contract. So it wasn't like a whole new contract for the 3rd book. The terms were the same. The only thing that changed was the amount that I was given when I signed that contract, and the dates obviously changed and the titles changed, but everything else, all the terms about the book, just roll over into any subsequent book.
Pam?
So I was also going to say they often want first right of refusal on your 2nd book.
Which means that you've got to submit your next book to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll have 2 more. This is interesting. Would you consider GPT, shows you what I know, a helpful tool or a threat to writers? Many have expressed a concern that many writers could be replaced by GPT gradually. How can writers sustain the writing profession? Interesting question. Mark?
So as a teacher, we're dealing with this as well. You know, everybody's talking about ChatGPT, and kids are going to be writing their essays on ChatGPT. As a teacher, I can tell you 100%, no student of mine is going to pass a ChatGPT essay past me and expect it to pass. You know, like, we're teaching pretty specific things in terms of structure that ChatGPT is just not going to imitate. And then in terms of a novel, I have heard that there are people who are using it to self-publish on Amazon and just hoping that, you know, oh, that seems good, and somebody will just buy it. But, you know, that's kind of just a scam that they're trying to work that way. In terms of using ChatGPT to produce a novel, all ChatGPT does is take what's already on the internet and mash it up and reconstitute it for you. So there's nothing original about it in terms of an idea, and it's not writing. It's a waste of your time, I would say, to do that. Probably as people are reading, they're going to start to discover what are the distinguishing features of a ChatGPT book. But yeah, I would not say it's a threat at all, because the creative ideas that are coming out, I don't know what to say about that. Like, everything is new, and when you read it, but ChatGPT can't do that. So
yeah, I don't think ChatGPT can come up with the 3 witches that Mark was writing his series about. That's just
okay. In fairness, I stole those from Shakespeare, so I didn't come up with them either.
Okay, all right, 2 more. This is I don't know if any of us have been in this position. What happens if you submitted to many publishing companies and more than one accepted your book? What do you do? Pam, holy cow.
You enjoy the bidding war and you get yourself an agent really fast if you don't already have one.
Okay, Darlene, were you going to say something there?
I was just going to say you'd have a party.
Yeah. So don't hold your breath, though.
Yeah.
Okay, and this will be the last question, and I love this question. Is there anything you do to bribe yourself into writing or to reward yourself when you have written? What a great question. Jane?
I would just say that I don't, and I don't have to. Like other folks maybe here, writing is not my day job. It's something I do for fun around my life. I have a job, I have a family. So I'm very, very fortunate that I'm in the position that I'm in, that I can write for fun, and I don't have contracts like other people where they've sold books ahead. If that's you, then you're in a different position than I am. But I think if you are in a position, like I am, try to keep it fun. It's good to reward yourself, but also if you're finding that you're really just having to force yourself to write and it's not enjoyable or fun anymore and you're not on a deadline, maybe that's time to give yourself a little slack and accept that it's okay to go periods when you don't write, because if you're not loving it, if it's not fun, then maybe you maybe need more chocolate. I don't know.
Darlene, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm retired now, so I can write if I want to, and if I don't want to, if I don't feel like it, I won't. But nevertheless, I'm a big believer in rewarding yourself. So I'm big on goal setting and all that. And yeah, chocolate will do it a lot of times. Like, if I finish this chapter, I get to have a cup of tea and that nice chocolate that's waiting for me in the fridge, or I promise myself I can go for a walk with my dogs, which is one of the things I do for enjoyment, or go to the beach for an hour or something. So, but I think it is important to that little carrot. It always helps. I love it. I'm having fun with my writing. It's not a forced thing, but still, it's good to reward yourself a little bit. And the other big reward for me is if I finish my writing today, I get to read that book that I've been waiting to read. That's my biggest reward.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I draw a comic and send it out every day to a list of subscribers and encourage them to write back. So my reward is I get all these wonderful little notes that people send me about what's parallel in their lives to what I've drawn from mine.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, I mean, this time just flies by. Panel, I want to thank you so much. You're just great. And now I'm going to turn it back to Leah.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, everybody, so much for being here. We got a lot of info, and I'm really happy that we got to get to so many of those questions. And we're going to put up a couple of resources right now. Jonna will share the slide momentarily. This is a list of resources from the panelists. They've compiled a list of their favorite books and online resources that they hope will help you on your writing and illustrating journey. So the books are available to borrow from VPL, and the web resources are available for free online. Jonna will be putting these in the chat for us, so you can click on the links once they're in the chat. And we're also going to share some book lists that VPL has created, just in response to the diversity question that we got partway through. We're going to share some book lists that VPL's children's librarians have put together. These promote authors who share marginalized identities with the characters that they portray in their books, just to show there definitely is diversity in children's books, and our librarians work hard to be sure that those books can be found at the library. I want to say thank you to Jonna, my colleague who's running the behind the scenes for us today. A huge thank you to Ellen and to all the panelists for sharing their time and knowledge with us today. I'll remind you to check out vpl.ca/events to see some upcoming programs and events at the library. We'll also be sharing our VPL program feedback survey. So if there's something you really liked about today or something that you think we could do differently next time, please feel free to share your thoughts with us. The survey takes about 2 minutes, and we really, really value all of your feedback. And so we'll be leaving this slide up for a few more minutes so you can jot down some notes or follow some of the links. And that's it for this evening. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you next time.